Hey, what's up everyone? It's JT from Drumunist back with another tutorial. Today we're going to talk about how to set your compression for drums. Now I'm going to start off with a brief tutorial for people who just want to grab the numbers and go. And then afterwards I'll go back over all the settings in greater detail for people who want to learn a little bit more. So let's jump into setting your compressor. A digital compressor, in this case a plug-in on the Reaper DAW, although this technique will work with any DAW and with any compressor. Here's Reaper's compressor. If you don't use this plugin, it may look completely alien to you. It has all the settings you can find on a compressor, maybe more than others. If you use a different compressor or a different plugin, hopefully you can use what I talk about today to help you convert it to that. So we'll start off with the pre-comp. We're just going to leave that alone. The attack, that's usually around 40 to 60 milliseconds. For drums, we're just going to play it safe and go with a high 60 milliseconds. That's going to let the transient through, going to let the attack come through before the compressor pulls the trigger. The release you want to set, it depends on the tempo of the song, but generally somewhere in the 300s, 400s. You want to do so that the compressor breathes with the rhythm of the song. The ratio, all right, we'll skip that for now. Skip all this other stuff. The knee size. I use as big of a knee as possible in most circumstances. I'll get into why later, but just for this quick run through, make the knee as big as it can possibly be. RMS size, turn that up a little bit. We'll talk about why later, but for drums it's good to have a bigger RMS size. All right, so now we're going to listen to the track, and that will help us set our threshold as well as our ratio. First up, we're going to turn the ratio up just to an arbitrary number right now, and we're going to hit play. I'm going to pull this down until that red mark is strongly accentuated. All right, as you can see, it's reacting. So we're going to leave that threshold at 7.5, but we're going to dial the ratio way back to about a 1.2. We're going to listen to what sounds good. All right, I like it at 1.26. And now we're going to lower the threshold a little bit more until this compressor is about -1. We're about a -0.5 decibels right now. We want it to be compressing about right about 1 decibel. So we'll just keep pulling the threshold down until the loudest parts are about -1, so -0.9, that's pretty good. All right, I'm happy with that. And now the makeup gain. For the makeup gain, just set it at +1 decibel for now. And we'll talk about different choices you can make with that later. But for now, those are all the settings you'll need. That was the brief overview. Here's an example of the drums without compression. And now with. It's a little bit fuller. All right, so thanks for everyone who's still watching. If you are, that means you want to just know a little bit more about all these settings. So we'll talk a little bit more about all these settings. So here with the pre-comp, I told you not to touch it, and you would only use this, you would only turn this up in very specific circumstances, like perhaps if you're mixing and mastering, if you've got a bunch of clipping, What this does, you can set this, for example, 59.3 milliseconds. So that this will make the compressor start compressing 59.3 milliseconds before it would if it was going to. So it will read ahead, essentially, and then start compressing early. So if you've got just a very loud hit in the middle of some otherwise well-mixed music, and you just want to set a low threshold and catch it when it gets really loud and compress the heck out of it, and also make the compressor fire early so that it will build up compression before that hit actually happens. So it's just a good way to address your clipping without affecting the rest of the mix. So if you do have some clipping, you would set just a very low threshold, set a pretty high compression ratio, because it doesn't have much room to work in this minus 0.38 decibels that we have here. You would set the attack at 0 because you don't want to let any transients through in this hypothetical situation we're talking about, where you just have a couple rogue loud hits on the drum that are clipping. Maybe you hit the snare and the cymbal and the bass drum all at the same time, and it adds up, and it's just clipping no matter how much you turn things down and compress. There's still clips happening, so here's how you remedy that. You can leave the release what it was, that's fine. And then you would actually want a small knee size in this circumstance, not 0. So maybe very small knee would be like 1.4. So that loud sound that is clipping is going to be caught minus 3.8 decibels before it clips, and the compressor is even going to engage 59.3 milliseconds early and compress it at this very high ratio. So it will catch it ideally just the loud hit in this tiny space here before it clips at this black line, and that should remedy your clipping problems. But the settings for this circumstance are very different from what you would use for virtually every instrument. So we're gonna set it back to what we would do for drums. So now we've talked about pre-comp and what that does. Makes the compressor start compressing early. So the attack, that makes the compressor compress late. It will let this much time through before it starts compressing. So this allows the transients to come through uncompressed and just helps the attack of not only drums but every instrument. You'll generally want to set an attack of 40 to, use your ear, but somewhere in the 40 to 60 millisecond range, especially with bass. If they're finger picking or doing some slap bass, you're going to want a higher attack in there just to let all that funky attack in there without compressing it. It'll make it stand out in the mix. The release, that's how long the compressor will stay compressing the signal before it eventually exhales or goes back up. And you'll set this based on the tempo of your song. I don't know what the conversion is, but I think like 120 BPM is something around 400, 420, and 144 BPM is somewhere around 360 or 320. Don't quote me on that. But the way to set this is to play the music, and you're going to want this to be going up and down to the rhythm. Less. There we go. We want this to return all the way back to the top before the next big hit. So I'm still going to dial the release down a little bit. There we go. There we go. It's breathing with the rhythm of the recording. Very good. Now all these settings, auto release, classic attack, weird knee, I would just avoid that. I'm sure it does some weird sounding digital thing to. Let's just listen. it sounds like it over compresses it. I'm not even going to mess with the other two. It's not worth it. All right, so the ratio. The ratio is how hard the compressor compresses the signal. So in this case, for every 1 decibel, it's going to compress 1.26 into that same space. Did that make any sense? No, it didn't. Let's do this. Let's say it's 3-to-1. Any sound that makes it above this threshold will start to be compressed by a factor of, it will be cut in third. So the ratio is 3-to-1. Everything that makes it past a certain point will start to be compressed, and the amount of compression in this case would reduce it to 33% of what it was. So here's where the knee comes into play. Since we have such a large knee, technically our threshold is -12, but the compressor will actually start compressing another 24 decibels below -12. So it's picking up some very soft signals and compressing it lightly, only to accentuate it with the makeup gain at the very end, which we'll talk about that. So we've got a big knee starting its compression way down here, and that's why we've got such a low compression ratio. I know everyone talks about setting it to 3-to-1 for this and 4-to-1, 5-to-1 for that. And yes, there's situations for that. Your kick drum, you may have a smaller knee and higher compression. That makes total sense. In this case, we're compressing the entire kit together, so we're not going to do anything funny like over-compress the bass drum to kind of bring it forward in the mix. Generally, a higher compression ratio, at least to me, makes the instrument come to the forefront of the soundscape. So, for example, vocals are normally over-compressed or normally compressed more so than the rest of the mix. And when you listen to virtually every song, the singer seems to be standing front and center in front of you when you're listening in stereo. The higher compression ratio is kind of what does that, bring it to the front. But again, in our case, we're using a bigger knee to have softer compression. It's going to very gently compress light signals that it picks up down here at -12 minus another 24 decibels. It'll compress it lightly. But then the louder sounds that are up here near the -12 decibels and above, those will start compressing down here and will be compressed the entire way up. So this larger knee gives a more soft kind of analog feel to this digital compression. It gives light compression to the lower tones and gives a lot of compression to the louder tones. And it just sounds smoother. Now again, there are situations where you would change this if there was clipping going on. You would want the knee size way down, the ratio way up, and you would have your threshold higher. But you're not normally in that circumstance if you've got everything right on the forefront. If all your gain staging is right and everything else, you shouldn't have a whole bunch of clipping going on. All right, so the low pass and high pass, I guess it's obvious, but I'll still go over it. The compressor will only detect and compress what is below this setting. So for drums, honestly, damn, my dog's snoring. All right. So for drums, you could set this for 10,000 hertz and only have it pay attention to what's going on under that. You could even set it lower to 3,000 or even 2,000 hertz. So this way the compressor will only pay attention to the drums, the toms essentially, and not even try to compress the cymbals, which will all be way higher than that. So that's an option you have. I typically just let it compress the entire signal. And then same deal with the high pass. If for some reason you wanted to ignore the bass and only compress the high stuff, maybe. If you have something weird, funny going on with your cymbals and you want to somehow target that and overcompress it for some whatever reason, that's fine. You would slide this up. But for most circumstances, it would be 0. You want it to detect everything. Maybe if you only want it to pay attention to audible frequencies. You could leave it at 37 or around the 40 range. That would be fine. But I tend to leave it at 0. All right, now the RMS size. This is the length of time around the compressed hit that the compressor will use to compare that hit. All right, that was horrible. I'm going to try that again. The RMS size is the amount of time before and after the compressed hit that the compressor compares that hit to. So let's say we've got 1,000 milliseconds, 1 second of RMS size, and there's a loud snare crack that triggers the compressor. So the compressor is going to look a second before and take everything from there and the second before and compare it to that hit, and it will look a second ahead and compare everything between then and a second ahead and a second forward in time and compare it to that. Generally, it's beneficial in drums to have a larger RMS size because you've got some loud hits that are dispersed and spread out. If it's only comparing to 5 milliseconds to the left and right, you may end up over-compressing your drum hit. So you may be better off with a larger RMS size, so it doesn't just compare to possibly dead space to the left and right, but it compares to the whole drum fill or the whole chop. The only reason I can think of to not leave this at 1,000 or just as high as it goes always is one, if it for some reason makes things sound funny, then of course dial it down. Always trust your ear. But the second reason might be resources on your computer. I imagine it probably takes a lot more RAM and CPU power, whatever the fancy computer talk. Probably takes far more computer resources with a larger RMS size. And then that would definitely come into play if you have separate compression settings for each channel. That would probably be a memory hog and a CPU hog. If it starts getting choppy, if your computer starts overheating, the RMS size might be the issue. On to it says output mix, wet and dry. So essentially this is makeup gain. So after compressing the loud stuff harshly and compressing the soft stuff lightly, we're going to come up to the makeup gain and add a certain amount of decibels to the track. You typically would not subtract decibels after compression. It doesn't make sense to compress and then also turn it down. It makes more sense to softly compress everything in relation to its loudness and then come back, and this adds a uniform 1.5 decibels to everything. So the soft stuff gets lightly compressed, maybe 0.1 decibel, and then pumped up 1.5. The loud stuff gets compressed, maybe minus 6 decibels, and then only gets pumped up 1.5. So essentially what this does, we'll look at this screen. You've got your uncompressed track and your compressed track, and you'll notice that what's obvious are the peaks in the uncompressed track. All the transients, here the attack, are much smaller on the compressed track, as they should be. That makes sense. You're compressing, right? However, here where the tracks are thin, where there's negative space in the sound wave, these are actually slightly fatter on the compressed track. It doesn't make any sense intuitively because we just talked about how it compresses the signal, so how then does it make the signal larger in some spots? Well, that's because good compression is a two-step process. The first step is compressing, and then the second step is the makeup gain. So the makeup gain is responsible for making the softer parts louder, and the compressor is responsible for making the louder parts softer. And ideally in a respective ratio, like we talk about with a large knee. The large knee and the small ratio ensures that you don't compress the soft spots, and then the makeup gain makes up more than what you compress the soft spots, but does not make up more than your peaks were. I hope that helps somebody. So generally, your makeup gain, I like it to be around or slightly above how much compression is going on. And since I usually aim for about 1 decibel of compression, I'll generally have about 1 decibel of makeup gain. Now, if that starts making the master mix clip, or the drum bus, or if anything's clipping, feel free to dial that down, but you should be somewhere between 0 and the amount of compression that's going on. So in my case, between 0 and 1. Now this dry output, this will just mix in the original uncompressed sound. Not a whole lot of reason to do that. You could thicken up the sound of drums or whatever instrument by just adding that if you need to in some circumstances, but I don't really see a point in blending your compressed sound with the uncompressed sound. Just go ahead and set your compressor well and go with the wet sound. Auto makeup, that's a kind of a cool feature. They'll go ahead and just set all of your settings for you, and it will give you kind of it will be loud and it will be over compressed, but if you're just lazy, you can just click the auto makeup. It actually doesn't sound that different, and I think that's a compliment to me. But it did get a little louder. Yeah, it's a little louder and a little more in the forefront, so it's more compressed. So if you're lazy, or if you're having trouble hearing the difference, if you're having trouble setting your compressor, if it's got some setting like this, it's like a shortcut. Preview filter. I'm sorry, I actually have no idea what that does. Let's listen. No clue. If anyone knows what that is, put it in the chat. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and say same with limit output. Maybe that keeps it from clipping. I don't know. I don't know why you would want to limit your output, though, in any circumstance. Maximum output. All right. So we just went through all the settings on a compressor that has a lot of settings on it. Showed you how to set your own compressor, and then we went back and talked about all the different settings and what they mean and how you can trust your ear to set your own compressor. What I don't want you to do is just copy and paste these numbers, come in and say, oh, attack. Well, you may be able to copy that, actually. But I want you to set your own ratio. I want you to set your own threshold, for sure. I want you to set your knee as big as it will go. You got to let the music play. Adjust the threshold until this becomes about -1. And adjust your ratio until the drums sound both open and full. If it doesn't sound open, if it sounds too closed off and maybe over compressed, that's way too compressed. You can hear that. Now it's very open, but kind of weak. So dial this up. There we go. It's thick, both thick and open, right about here. You got to use your ear. And now at the threshold here, about -8. That's good. I like it there. And there's no clipping going on here at the master mix. So our makeup gain is good at 0.8, and that's how you do it. All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. If anyone's got anything to add, throw it down in the comments section. If you want to talk about what preview filter and limit output means, if I'm wrong about something, go ahead and let me know about it. We can have a healthy discussion in a future video. I'm sure other people have different techniques, so I'm happy to learn. I'm not saying this is the one right way to go about it. It's a good way to go about digital compression with a plug-in on your DAW, but I know everyone's got their different methods, and it will certainly vary with the different compressors that you use. Some might have 3 or 4 knobs on it only. You may not have as many functions as this plug-in has, but it may sound way better than this. So you never know. You just always trust your ear. Turn the pots left and right. Dial it in where it sounds best. Use that for compression and use that for setting really everything in audio. So if anyone's got anything to add at all, throw it down in the comments section. If you got any requests for a future tutorial, throw that down there too. And once again, thanks for everyone for sticking around and watching. This is JT at Drumunist. Peace.